Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Rachel Nelson, Director of the UC Santa Cruz Institute of the Arts and Sciences, and I'm here with my brilliant collaborator and friend, Professor Gina Dent, and we're happy to welcome you to Visualizing Abolition today with the amazing Gilda Sheppard and Adrienne Marie Brown. As many of you might be aware, last academic year, Gina and I began the Visualizing Abolition series of online talks, 17 to be specific, film screenings, music videos, and other activities in collaboration with artists, scholars, lawyers, poets, filmmakers, musicians, to give sustained attention to the role of the arts in the movement for prison abolition. We hosted art exhibitions despite the challenges of the pandemic, including Barring Freedom at San Jose Museum of Art, co-curated with Alexandra Moore, and at UC Santa Cruz, Jackie Summel's Public Art and Garden project, Solitary Garden. In the past talks, music videos, and exhibition documentation can be found at visualizingabolition.ucsc.edu, and we'll circulate that in the chat. While we had originally planned for Visualizing Abolition to be a one-year initiative, there was an amazing response to the program, and tens of thousands of people attended the events and visited the exhibitions. And what was clear to us is the real hunger there is for social transformation. The urgency of conversations and activism around art, inequality, policing, prisons, systemic racism, and abolition have not abated since the summer of 2020. Instead, they continue to draw us together in our desires to imagine and create a world in which social problems and our histories of inequity are not answered with punishment in cages. So here we are, and with the generous support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, we're thrilled to announce that we will be continuing the speaking series and planning exhibitions with our partner, San Jose Museum of Art, for the next 3 years. There are a lot of people to thank, but I'm not going to take up your time to do so. I'll just say that if we have not acknowledged you yet, but do know that Gina and I will be continuing to show our gratitude. And for today, I just want to say thank you to Jasmine Allender, Dean of the Humanities at UC Santa Cruz, and Celine Perinos Shimizu, Dean of the Arts, for their support and commitment to collaboration and the radical dreaming that's needed for abolition to be realized. We also thank everyone who's clicked in today and all the days for your enthusiasm, which has kept us motivated to not only do the work, but also keep this space open to come together to share our strategies in abolitionist, imaginist summonings. We could not be more happy to relaunch the series with filmmaker Gilda Sheppard in her documentary Since I've Been Down, and the conversation with Adrienne Marie Brown. And I'll turn it over to Gina to talk more about that.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. I'm Gina Dent, and I'm so thrilled to be here with these incredible visionaries, Gilda Sheppard and Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm absolutely thrilled, as Rachel is, that Visualizing Abolition will continue. But as we know, until there are no prisons, our work is not done. So I hope everyone's had a chance now to see the amazing documentary Since I've Been Down. And if you have not been able to screen yet, you will still be able to watch the film for a couple of days after this event, and we hope you do. We're offering an on-demand online screening, and you'll hear more about that. It'll be screened till October 28th, and we're going to share the link out as well. It's an absolute pleasure for me to begin this program this year with this film. Really, this film has become a foundation for asking all of the questions together that have been segregated out into different spaces. It asks us to consider beauty, consider what the role of education could be. It helps us to think through what Ruth Wilson Gilmore has called organized abandonment, what's happened in communities that have been intentionally left behind. And it helps us to dream a new and better future. The film itself is absolutely riveting, and I know this conversation with these two luminaries will be a joy for all of us. I want to introduce them, and I'd like you all to join me on the screen now. Adrienne and Gilda, can I welcome you? Hi. Okay. Adrienne Marie Brown is the writer-in-residence at the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute, an author of Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy Facilitation and Mediation, We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice, Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, and co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements, and How to Get Stupid White Men Out of Office. She's the co-host of How to Survive the End of the World, Octavia's Parables, and Emergent Strategy podcasts. And of course, we know that Adrienne has been helping us to do the incredible work of making this project of ending prisons a joyful one. And Gilda Sheppard is an award-winning filmmaker. She is the executive producer, the director, the writer, and the magician who has put together this amazing film. She screened her documentaries throughout the United States and internationally. For over a decade, she's been teaching sociology classes in Washington State women and men's prisons. She's a sponsor of the Black Prisoners Caucus, which you'll know about if you've watched the film, and is among the founders and faculty for Freedom Education for Puget Sound, an organization offering college credit courses at Washington Correctional Center for Women. Sheppard is the author of several publications, including Culturally Relevant Arts Education for Social Justice, A Way Out of No Way. She's also a professor of sociology, cultural and media studies at the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus. Now the film, Since I've Been Down, focuses on one city in the United States, Tacoma, Washington, as an example of every town. Influenced by the national drug war frenzy and the fear-based culture of punishment in the 1980s and 90s, which we know continues, Tacoma sacrificed its most vulnerable children to a life behind bars. Those children, now adults, cannot be silenced as they advocate for transformative and restorative justice from behind bars, seeking to prevent future generations of Black and brown boys from the same fate. So welcome, Gilda and Adrienne. I look forward so much to this conversation, and I will see the both of you during the question and answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so exciting to get to be a part of this. And Gilda, hi. I feel like I'm getting to see I'm like my friend. I am, again, so moved by the work you're doing by Since I've Been Down, and I'm really excited to get to dive in with you on this tonight. And I want to tell people, in case they don't know, that it's really rare to have Gilda show up to talk about this by herself. Like in your dream world, you're rolling with the whole crew. You know, you've got Kamanti, you've got Tanya, you've got everybody rolling with you. And so I just want to name that if we could have everyone here, we would. And I know that you would. And we'll honor them tonight. We're going to bring in several clips so that you can see the community of this film and the teachers of this film. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you, how did this issue get onto your radar? Like, at what point was it like, oh, I think I need to be involved in this issue around abolition and incarceration and liberation, and I need to tell this story?
Well, you know, I'm fond of the quote by James Baldwin when he says, the role of an artist is the role of a lover. If I love you, I need to show you things that you don't see. And, you know, being a prison abolitionist and, you know, mass incarceration hits many families, including mine. And so I realized as a sociologist and an activist that there are systemic things that lead people to crime, to non-negotiable pathways, to gangs, and then based on a lot of systemic problems, gentrification, policing, you know, disinvestment in communities, and so many other things that lead, and even global capitalism, right, really impact that. But I was doing a documentary in Ghana, West Africa, in a refugee camp. You know, sometimes social scientists go far away, you know, when there's something right there in their neighborhood.
That's right.
And I was teaching in Evergreen, Tacoma, right there in Hilltop, where my film is, our film is The Context. And I remember my last day of filming at the refugee camp, one of the women who were the leaders of the camp, who had been a refugee for a decade, Whew. She said, you know, Sis Gilda, the same AK-47s that you see in our children's hands in the Civil War in Liberia are in your children's hands, and you need to do something about that. And I was like, whoa, that is true. It's not something that I didn't know. So when I came back to Seattle, Washington, where I live, and started teaching again in Tacoma at Evergreen State College, I started noticing that some of my students had ankle bracelets, one of which was Tanya Wilson, one of the smartest young women in my sociology classes. And I had to really change how I looked at people. You know, I thought, not you. Why not?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That this can ambush any of us on any day. And so I thought, I need to show things that I did not see, knew consciously, but did not see. And, you know, I'm reminded, Adrienne, of something I saw on YouTube of a workshop that you did. You had people stand in front of each other. Now, I'm probably going to mess this up and not say anything, but think about what they've been told about that person that they were looking at. Right? And how that influences you. And then you had them, without saying anything, then you had them think about how they could work together to make things change. I'm going to tell you that informed, I know this happened sometime after because it took me a while to do this documentary, but that was a reference for me as I moved through, you know, how do we see each other? And then how can we make things change? And with Tanya, I was able to see, like, okay, how do I see people when I look at them, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I love this too, because I think one we've talked a few times now, and one of the times I think we were saying, like, we all have a Tanya, we all have a Kamanti, we all have someone, those of us at least who show up in this work for abolition, generally we have someone that we're like, this person, and it's like breaking down how the system has structured to make us think constantly in a hierarchy, constantly, oh, if the system says you did something, then, you know, you're over there and I'm over here and I'm superior and there's nothing I can learn from you. Maybe I can help you. And I want to go now to Tanya's clip, because I feel like Tanya beautifully educates us on this. So yes, let's play Tanya.
Free will isn't so free, or it's not equitable. So if you have the resources to have 5 options open to you, and I have the resources to have 2 open to me, how free am I to really choose? And as long as society divvies up opportunity and resources where a certain kind of person has 5 and another kind has 2 for nothing except for superficial characteristics that are outside of an individual's control, it will be society's fault that prisons are full. Society.
A clip of the clip. Yeah, I'm gonna drink water all night long. So when you see that and you know, you're learning from Tanya, I want to ask you a little bit, you know, she was your student, you experienced her in that way, and tell us a little bit more about Tanya, what she did when she was in, you know, the organizing she did there, what she's done since.
Right. And that was the second time Tanya had been in prison, right? And so you think, what happened? And you look at all the institutions that have, and policies that have impacted her, you know, drugs, which is a public health issue, you know, involved in her family, poverty. And Tanya was in a gang, and she was a driver sometimes. And gang-related drive-bys, but she was in prison this time for something she didn't do. Now, she didn't do this particular drive-by. And one thing is, I want to let you know that there is a policy in Washington State that says that if you shoot from a car,
Right.
you can get life without parole. But if you stepped out of the car and walked a few feet away, you can get 20-something years. Who shoots from a car?
Yeah.
So the practice of
That's right.
racism, and I dare say sexism, because the courts were after her boyfriend, right? And so she was ambushed in that. And this is a crime that they didn't commit. Now, she's not saying that she didn't do those things, and I don't know what, right? But, and I'm not saying that, and I want everybody who's listening to see how they felt when I said what was Tanya's position in society. Do we look at her as, deviant? Or as a prison abolitionist, do we look at her and say, I want to stop brilliant people like her and those who could be from having this as an option? Right?
That's right.
So
That's
when she
right.
got in prison,
Yeah. Well, just briefly, I think that's the thing that I want to say about this. One of the things I love about the film is that people are kind of post-innocence, right? It's like we've already been indicted by all these systems. We were indicted from the time we were born. We were indicted before that, like there was never a point where we weren't being tracked towards this outcome. Like the film makes that so clear. And then everyone's sitting there, okay, innocence was never one of the things we were given as an option. What else, right? How do we then reclaim a life for ourselves that is actually meaningful and miraculous and powerful? So tell us how Tanya has done that.
You see, the rest of that clip says that she challenges us to say that they are us, and we are complicit in that, right? The clip was a little cut short. But when Tanya got into prison, the women's prison, and that women's prison was the most violent prison in the state of Washington, in the 12 prisons in the state of Washington. She and her colleagues got together and started a group called the Women's Village.
Yes.
And when they started that, and they started it using education, they looked at environment, they looked at social, emotional things, but also how that influences how we move in an environment that have policies against us, right?
That's right.
Anger management, reading skills, critical thinking skills, looking at language, how that imposes. And when these women cross race lines, started doing those classes, teaching each other, violence went down by 50%. So it's kind of like as Bell Hooks says, choosing the margin as a place of radical possibilities. They know, they live it, their proximity to the problem. So when they look at somebody's eyes, and I'm not being essentialist, but when they look at somebody's eyes, they know, that's emergent strategies, right?
I think so. Exactly. I feel like there's a piece, I felt like watching this film, I was like, emergent strategy, like what I understand as emergent strategy, like I see it in all of these programs where, it's sort of like the seed that gets dropped through the crack in the concrete. And it's like, okay, then this is where we're going to grow, and we will figure it out. We will get enough water, enough sun. And, so the Women's Village was one program that we learned about in this process, and Teach is one of the other programs. And they're both this emergent, beautiful process where people are saying, actually, education, real education about who we are and where we come from is one of the answers, one of the ways we can begin to understand ourselves as people of agency. And I wanted, before we go to any clip of it, can you tell us what Teach stands for and how it came to pass?
Okay, it is the Black Prisoner Caucus Teach.
Yes.
Teach is taking education and creating history, not changing it.
Yes.
Creating it.
Creating
right?
history.
So looking at what is and creating what can be. You know, there's this quote from Bell Hooks that says, to be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination in our concrete reality while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. And that's what Teach did. There's a tendency, I think, in Black organizing. Fred Hampton, and when he and the Black Panthers, you know, the men and women went over to a place in Illinois and started working with folks with Confederate flags. Kamonte Carter, with the Black Prisoners Caucus, took that legacy when he went to Clallam Bay prison and talked to Asian, Pacific Islanders, Asian Americans, even had a guy went over to the white nationalist gangs, guy with swastikas all over him, because he understood the fundamental revolutionary possibility when you know what has happened to you, that systemic kind of understanding. And they all got together, I mean, cross race lines, cross ideological lines, emerging strategies. And they started teaching each other, first cultural classes, you know, and started teaching together. A guy teaching something about Central America, and the guy with swastikas teaching something about Viking history. You know, so I mean, so
yes,
it was
I mean, I was so moved by this as someone who's been, you know, facilitating and doing movement work for such a long time, because I feel like I see the tendency to move away from that. You know, people are like, oh, multiracial organizing, you know, like we're going to just get in and just do our thing with our folks. And, you know, it's like hard to remind people, like, we're on the earth together. We have to actually be in these relationships with each other. And we face actually much more common threats and common problems. These systems impact us so much more, so many more of us together. There's such a few people who are actually benefiting from them, and they benefit when we are divided from each other. So I want to show this, I think the Teach Board clip, because I feel like it really elucidates this.
Half 2 hours within the day.
We decided to diversify our board. This way we can attract more students, but also we can understand each other more. It's reaching all corners of the prison.
Part of me coming on board with this was seeing what you guys were doing and wanting to get behind that. I was like, yes, finally an opportunity for me to go and do something productive that wasn't provided before, that inmates created. We've created a support group for positivity in the most unlikely of environments.
We've been pitted against one another for so long, it literally allows the prison to run itself. As long as they stay separated, we ain't got to worry about them coming together, becoming knowledgeable, fixing the social issues that end up landing them in prison in the first place. The more that we begin to educate ourselves, the more empowered we become. The less manipulated we can be, the less oppressed we can be. Now what we're beginning to realize is that we can get more accomplished together than we can apart.
I bow down, you know. So that, for folks who haven't seen the film yet, that's Kamonte who's kind of guiding us through that moment there. And you know, it really felt like there's such an authenticity to the multiracial organizing that's happening here, and to the teaching that's happening here, that it's not being done for show. It's not being done to check anything off. It's really, our survival is tied up with each other. And I wonder if you can reflect for us, you know, as someone who both teaches and creates film and creates work like this, what do you think are the elements of Teach that make it so successful? Like, what do you wish everyone could learn as we're teachers in and out of these systems?
To honor the student as also your teacher. I think that is so extremely important. Sometimes I get a syllabus together and all these things. And sometimes I just do it to week 5 because I am not sure what's going to happen. I'm not sure who I'm going to meet, right? And also your proximity to community, is
Yeah.
extremely important. No, you may not live in the same neighborhood as your students and those kinds of things,
Mhm.
but knowing about the possibility, as Gramsci says, of the organic intellectual, and allowing our students to find that organic intellectual base in their community and
That's
bring
right.
it into the classroom, to break down those walls and really have public education. Have them do ethnographic research in their families. Have them bring, if they're doing science or environment, have them research their neighborhoods, find that kind of scholarship. So look at these complex systems and I dare say, do something that makes you uncomfortable. I think that's extremely important. And to lay yourself on the line. When have you made these errors, right? We live in a hierarchical society, and sometimes we'll point out contradictions in other people, but not in us as a teacher. And we're perpetuating that kind of like, the hello,
Yes.
I
I know things, right? No, I mean, I deeply think this, like, there's something, it's part of why I was always like, I'm a facilitator, not a teacher, because I'm like, I don't know, we are going to know. We're the ones who are going to figure this out. And popular education does that too, which is absolutely what I see them doing, and saying, like, we each have pieces to add to this story, and what we know matters from our lived experience, from our scholarship, what we know matters. And what I love about this is it takes what many of us look at as an ending. It's like, oh, I'm landing in behind bars in this captivity, and this is it. And it says, actually, this is the beginning of something new. This captivity, this pressure is going to be some seed, and something new is going to burst here, which is fundamentally life moving towards life. Like, it's like we're composting whatever life has given us into something incredible with each other. I want to share now, and I'm like, I hope I get the name right. It's the new kids, the one that talks about the new kids coming in. And the culture that's being set.
That is,
what's that one called?
Okay, I think that's Positive Examples. Yeah. Right. Okay,
good. I think that's it.
Yeah. When he says the new kids coming in, da 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 da.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want people to see that.
Yeah, that's it. There's the clip.
That's it.
Most of our board members are lifers, and most of them have created a reputation for themselves around here that isn't all that sparkling in the eyes of the administration. But the new kids that come in that are ready for battle, that earn their stripes, we're the guys that they would look up to.
There's a kid right now who's probably 19 or 20 years old who, when he first came into this unit, he was ready for a battle, ready for war. And when he came and asked, what's up, what's going on, with the thug mentality and the attitude, it was like, this is what we're on. This is what we're doing. And if you look at him 2 months into him being here, he's over there at a table studying right now. He's doing that on his own because he sees what example we've set.
They leave the class teachers. I want them to go disperse all the information that they can to the other young brothers.
We're trying to give back to the kids that still got a chance at going to the streets and still can be productive citizens. The administration, they like this, they're happy for this because it helps them. This environment is nowhere near as violent as it has been. When we first started teaching, they was kind of skeptical. They was like, hold on, we don't know what you guys are doing up here. We want to make sure you guys are doing this. But then after they seen all the work we've been doing and all the stuff we've been accomplishing, it's like, okay, this is serious. This is real. This is helping. This is something good. So that's what we've been doing, huh, Chad?
Yeah,
see, I couldn't have did that about 10 years ago.
Yeah, and Chad's the one with the swastikas. When we came, a lot of this is cinema verite. It's not like these are the questions we're going to ask you, right? And and so Chad is the one with the swastikas. When we went there, it had the crew and it had everybody. Chad took off his shirt and he said, "Tape this." And he had swastikas and all kinds of things all over him. And he says, just because you want to know something about a particular culture doesn't mean you have to disrespect something else. And he still is in, so I asked Kamante, is he still in the white nationalist group?
Yes.
He said, yeah. What?
Yeah.
He's got consciousness, so we should keep him away. We should use, as you talk about so much, Adrienne, we will not cancel us.
Yes.
You embodied that in that book, I'm telling you. And thank you. They want me to tell you thank you because Adrienne sent emergent strategies and pleasure activism to many books to the prisons. And so, and they're using them. They're doing study groups when they can because of COVID is kind of crazy, but thank you. You are adding to their scholarship and their practice.
Well, and you know, I think one of the things that Gilda moved me so much about this and moved me so much, you know, I've been hearing more and more from people who are incarcerated and organized and using emergent strategy and other tactics behind bars. And what I'm moved by is there's one thing to practice it, you know, as a facilitator. There's one thing to sit with it theoretically, and then there's another to really get in it. And I feel like this inspired me because I'm like, even for me, as someone who's like, we will not cancel us, but I'm like, okay, but if someone with a swastika comes up, you know, am I ready to still see that person's humanity? And I can recognize in myself that something has been turning off in that, you know, that I'm like, oh, and maybe it's this exhaustion, right? But there's something about this that was reinvigorating for me that was like, we have to be able to see the humanity in people if they are interested in moving towards life, moving towards their humanity, being in a conversation, opening up, being curious, challenging their own limitations, then we can meet them. We can meet them there. And I feel like, especially that clip, and what they're really doing is setting culture, is resetting culture, right? It's that there's one culture that exists in their communities before they go in that leads to this inevitable outcome. And then in there, they're saying we can actually change the culture. Right. So that when we come out, each of us then carries that new culture back out into the world. We become a seed of something else. And first I want to say, do you see it that way? You know, do you see that as what they're doing? Because it feels like, I'm like, it's so big, you know? So big. Does that resonate to you?
Oh, totally. They realize the culture is dynamic. And when you start to see what institutions have blinded you from seeing, and then you wake up to that, it is just, I mean, it's like what you say here. Emergence is beyond what the sum of its parts could even imagine. A group of caterpillars or nymphs might not see flight in their future, but it's inevitable. It's destiny. Right. And that's what they're doing. That's what is possibly natural, right? And what we do to our children. They're
reclaiming their destiny.
You know? They're creating history, they're creating their destiny. They know they have, and they're spreading the word. We're not saying you can't belong to this group anymore. No. And now you have a responsibility. What did Tony K. Barbara said? To be a revolutionary artist, you have to make the revolution irresistible. Okay.
Well, because it's also like we have to think about people as vectors of these changes, you know, that it's like, oh, that person could pull themselves out of that space, you know, but if they stay in that space as someone who says, I actually see all of this differently, what then becomes possible, right? And I think about that all the time, that I'm like, everyone has a particular work that is theirs to do, you know? Everyone has a particular work, and what we do when we teach each other is we create more possibilities of what work is what that work could do and how many people it could touch. Right. So I want to move in now. There's 2 more clips I want us to look at, and maybe we can just play them, you know, just back to back. And then I want to talk a little bit before we go to the audience. I want to talk about craft, because you know, there's the messages of this, but then the film you made is one of the most gorgeous, beautiful, artistic experiences. So I want to also get some time on that. So why don't we go to We Don't Have Spaces first?
And this is the healthy thinking class.
Yeah.
Teach.
We don't have spaces in which we can truly be ourselves. And for you not to truly be your real self, man, you rob yourself every day. We gotta have places where we can come talk about. You gotta have that in the world. Everybody wants to grow, man. You know, even the people that tell you that they don't. The reason why they're saying that is they're probably afraid. You know, especially in a place like this.
I thought I was untouchable. I thought I'll never wind up back in prison again. I'm tired of thinking like that. You know, I got 7 kids. I got 6 daughters and 1 boy. I want to get out and I want to show that, you know what, I can be that father that you all deserve.
My son got incarcerated here, and I learned what my biggest fear was. And it goes back into what Dee had on the board about memory. One of my son's great friends is Charles Pouncey, and he said, your son used to say he wished he could come to prison just so he could be with you. In that moment, I said, this is what you've left your child and this woman and your family to do. They say, you said if you ain't thinking, it's dead. You're never too old to find that peace with your children, with yourself.
It's profound. It's profound.
This is not about a prison education program. And to be very clear, it is not about the Department of Corrections at all. They just geographically happen to be oppressed there. They could be oppressed anywhere else in the community. It's a trip because we got some class issues going on. There are many of us who do not believe that people who are in prison can have the answers to our problems. We do not believe that the people sleeping under the bridge can have the answers to their reality. Because we have people with PhDs and master's degrees who then have been certified to do that work. And they have been doing it over and over and over and over and over again. I'm in a system where we've had a 10-year plan that has now turned into a 20-year plan, and they just changed the name, and it's game. Those brothers know game.
So for all of the classes that we've offered this summer,
we can't wait just for people in prison. Aaron's children have the solutions to our problems. And what we will do in 10 years, if we don't attend to this, we'll be visiting I'm not going to put that on your babies, but it's really the truth. Don't think it's not true. Because they got the DOC, the BOP, the Federal Detention Center, the juvenile system, everybody's in the business. And they waiting for the education system to fail our babies so that they go in there. And I don't even want to blame DOC because it took a whole lot of institutions to get them there. We failed them. In spite of that, they've got the answer. That's that spirit that slavery did not kill. That's that spirit that the genocide, that attempted genocide of indigenous people did not kill.
it moves me to tears every time. I feel like there's this profound reclamation of our true selves that is being offered to us in this film and in these sections. And this idea that if I can't be my true self, if I can't look at and contend with my true self, I can't have peace. And then I can't bring peace to the next generation, right? Like that intergenerational peace where it's like, when they say like there's something that slavery did not kill, but that doesn't mean these systems have not stopped trying. And that doesn't mean that just because slavery ended that we now get to be free and we get to be our true selves. I feel like the invitation that they're making to all of us is that we deserve to be that true self, that we all need the space to be that true self, and that it happens in relationship, you know, that it's not being isolated from society and from each other, but it's in relationship. So I'm so into it. One thing I think I can imagine people saying is, oh, look at how well they're doing in there. You know, look at what they figured out. And isn't this working? And, you know, I felt the opposite watching it, but I'm also, you know, hardcore abolitionist, but I want to hear you speak a little bit about that, right? It's like what they're actually up to.
Well, that last clip was a community meeting because the Department of Corrections was saying that the prisoners couldn't talk to prisoners, you know, for this length of time and on and on and on. So we had to gather community together. And one of the persons that came was the head of the Department of Corrections in the capital of Washington State. So, and folks on the outside, and this is what we have to do, use our privilege in a responsible way. Folks on the outside said, oh, no. And people, they cross race lines. You're saving my daughter, my cousin, my uncle, my husband, my wife, my partner, my lover, my child. Some of my students have been in prison in an adult prison since they were 13.
That's right.
But now they have the brain science. And so he was let out after being there in 20-something years. He spent most of his life in prison. That is not the place that allows for redemption. Every step of the way, those brothers have, and now the sisters, because they have a Black Prisoners Caucus over there, right, have to struggle to, and particularly in these COVID times, even more, you know, to make things work. I'm not saying that there's not anybody in the Department of Corrections that is more amenable to this. Yes, but it's always a struggle for that.
Yes.
And what's so important is that it is not, as Mary Flowers says, it is not just DLC. This culture of punishment is mirrored in K through 12. I just say in childcare. When you go to a doctor, come on. When you go to a doctor, you know, any school, some of our peers, and we're not careful that we have to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this is what starts in the home, right? Like, I think when we live in a punitive culture, it imbues every aspect of our culture. So, you know, I was tracing this, that if those main acts of punitive culture are separating you from the community and injuring you, physically harming you, physically hurting the body, right? Then that starts very young. For many of us, it's like it's like you just did something bad, you need to go away from everyone. You need to go be by yourself, or I'm gonna hit you. You're gonna get ostracized. We move into the school system, you're gonna get detention, suspension, expulsion, juvenile. We're gonna keep, you know, and that keeps going. We're adults and we ostracize each other, we kick each other out all the time, right? And sometimes, you know, we're trying to set a boundary, but a lot of times we're really disposing of each other. And then, you know, that I think that disposal then creates even more susceptibility for these systems, right? Where these systems are like, oh, we are hungry. Anyone you dispose of, we will come and get them. And we're hungrier than that. That's, you know, you'll never dispose enough for us. We want everyone, right? Because they don't want us to exist, you know? I mean, like, you know, at the end of the day, they don't want us to exist outside of the context of labor, right? It's really, you know, for me, I look at this and I see that capitalism all throughout it, you know, that it's like, this structure is for labor. And then you hear Kamanti and Tanya and Andre and all these leaders saying, actually, our lives are something beyond labor, and our lives are something beyond punishment, and our lives are something beyond the worst thing that we did. We're capable of recovering. We're capable of so much more. And it's I want everyone to watch this and think about in their own lives, where does punishment show up? You know, who have I written off? Who have I decided no longer has value to me to listen to? Who do I think is so other, you know, that they can't be of me or in community with me? And you don't have to run out and act on that right away, right? But I think it does deserve interrogation, right? How is the system gaming me, right? When she says that's game, right? And these brothers understand game, and I was like,
yeah, right.
They know game, right? They really are like, repeat that y'all are trying to keep us separated so that you can keep us weak, so that we don't have the power to actually stand up against this system. And then I think what you're doing with this film is you make that wall porous so that we can reach through and grab onto each other and say, and we're all doing this together, you know, like we'll shake down these walls, but also the walls that we're building outside those systems. There's a question I had for you, because the analysis of what leads to this system is so intact in the film, is if you were to look before the system, before we get to this prison place, how do we break this pattern that leads to incarceration for our children? Like, you know, is there an intervention in education? Is there an intervention at home? Like, what would you say, or a few, you know, like where would you point to as like, here's how we break this cycle that leads to this outcome?
Well, here's the formula. No.
Yes, tell us.
No magic
okay,
formula.
you know it.
and you know, in the beginning of the film, I use Comanche Carter as like the Mississippi River and the tributaries of all these policies that continue to exist. You know, it's kind of like what Fred Hampton said. If you don't know where to start, just open the door, look in the front, look to the side, look to the other side, look behind you, and start there. Start with something that you're proximal with. If it's education, it's education. I think education is pivotal. Now there's this movement to stop, they say critical race theory. I'm teaching K-12. That is really language that scares you. They're not teaching critical race theory. Critical thinking is what they're teaching.
Yes.
I think anything that involves critical and creative thinking is very important. That's the reason why I have dance in there, crumping, because we hold all of our anxieties and all of our problems and everything else in our bodies. And then before we know it, it comes up. It's not like people didn't look like the folks in prison didn't vote for those policies. The first time 3 strikes you're out was a policy, was in the neoliberal Washington state, right?
That's right.
Not California, Washington state. And then here comes surveillance cameras. It's a pattern. Here comes disinvestment. Here comes policing. I had policemen in there talking about, I could do whatever I wanted.
That's right.
You know, I didn't have, and I asked him, what is justice? I told him I was going to ask him this question because I didn't want to ambush. I just wanted to know. And he said, never thought about it. And I thought about, when do I think about justice before I started teaching in prison? I thought about justice when a crime was committed. And one of the people in the classroom at Black Prisoners Caucus teach said, this classroom is justice. You know, we have to change the way we think about each other. And education institution is very important. Support for families. I mean, a kid could get suspended for a whole entire school district. They're learning the culture of punishment.
That's right.
I sometimes think that America's dirty little secret, okay, hold on to your seats now, is that we don't like children. If you look at policies, I know we do, but you look at policy. So I think that wherever you're proximal to something, start there. You ain't got to jump and say, let me volunteer in the prison. Start where you are, right?
Yeah.
Do something that makes yourself uncomfortable. And as Brian Stevenson says, disrupt the narrative that sustains the problem. And my dear friends, you know, as in emergent strategies, and we will not cancel us, we got to maintain hope, that a hope that is fired in the kiln of practice, that we're doing something. That's the reason why I have kids with masks on shooting each other with capes on. Because when I was doing the film in Ghana, West Africa, in the refugee camp, I met child soldiers who showed me pictures of themselves, and they were kids, just like the Crips and the Bloods, right? With masks on. They had masks. Sometimes they had a teddy bear tucked into their pack where they carried a gun. They're children. And sometimes, even no matter how old we are, we're still that child. And we hold it in our bodies, you know? And so you start where you're where you can.
Yeah.
You must start.
I think this is, you know, you're such a beam of light when you share about this, because it's so clear. It's like, yes, this is what I tell people all the time. I'm like, you can get overwhelmed. If you try to take it all in, you'll get overwhelmed very quickly. And then it's like, I can't, it's too big. Everything's too big. But it's like, okay, but then where do you intersect with all this big, right? Where does it live in you? What practices do you need to put down and pick up? What relationships could you open yourself up to? And I think what you just said about America and children, I think it's true of capitalism and children, actually. You know, this is one of the things I deeply believe, that for, you know, capitalism didn't exist for always. You know, it's a relatively young system inside of all of human systems, right? And there were systems that were structured around family and around children. And then now it's the opposite. It's like this, the whole system is structured around labor and production and accumulation of money for some. And children are just a part of that system, right? It's like, how quickly can we get them to work and to be obedient so that they will go and do what we told them to do? And I'm so interested, you know, when you say this, I'm like, I want people who are parents to also understand that you are a front line for this. You are a front line for this, right? That the choice of punishment versus accountability, even in your home structure, you know, being able to sit down with children and figure out what are ways that we can have accountability and justice and sweetness and calmness and love. How do we do that, right? Here in this home, how do we take accountability and ask ourselves, why did we do things? I feel like that space, every single teacher, every single one is a front line of this. That's how we learn culture. That's how we learn to be with each other. And in this period, it's like, I think wherever you are, you know, like wherever you are, how are you an intervention in that location? So I want to ask you just now this craft piece, because you could have made this film a number of ways, and you chose to make it including dance, including the poetic, including really this, it's like the way the story unfolds, it's rhizomatic is what I keep thinking. It's sort of like, okay, here we have Comanche. Comanche did this thing, but the rhizomatic is like, you have the seed, and then it, instead of growing down up, it grows in every direction. It's constantly growing. And I feel like you're doing that. You're like, oh, from Comanche, we can move in all these directions, and all these directions move back towards Comanche, and including the dance piece, which allowed this emotion to flow through, was such a, it's an intriguing and super necessary choice. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit, like, as a filmmaker, what was your intention with this documentary, and how did you know that those cultural pieces were necessary to include? Like, was it like from the beginning, I know this is going to have to be there, or was it as you were doing it, you're like, oh shit, we got to have Crumpet? You know, like, when did that happen?
I think, you know, I think it's Mao Zedong who said, practice is a criteria of truth. So once I got involved in it, you know, once you get close to either fiction or non-fictional writing or dreaming as an artist, you start dreaming about certain things. I started remembering what I learned from the refugee camp, and how I wanted to maintain to people that these are children. So I got some kids together and I said, I want you to paint these masks, kids from the neighborhood, you know, I want you to paint these masks and I want you to play like, you know, you're gonna, you know, and they were like, okay, let's do it. But then I also talked to them about the film, you know, that, you know, gangs and yeah, somebody they know in a gang and something like that. And I said, you know, how are they still kids? And they were saying, yeah. I said, so play like you're still a kid. And and how sometimes we are taught to do wrong to each other. So they put on the capes and mask, and they just went to town, right?
That's right.
And then afterwards, we sat down and kind of debriefed them about certain things, and then we talked to them. And then I went to this thing, this wonderful art exhibit with Christopher Paul Jordan in Tacoma, who's quite an activist and artist, and they were doing these crumping, and I was like, what is that? I want to, you know, either learn it or put it in my film, because it was just so, it was like in their bodies and everything, you know? So I wanted to show that. I think metaphors are very important because we see them everywhere in society, but don't get me started. You know, you're talking to me about my art craft. So I
want to talk about your art craft. I'm like, because I do think it's important. I think it's actually crucial. Like you could, a million people could have made this film and it wouldn't have hit this way. It wouldn't have landed this way.
Right.
Right. The art craft is actually crucial to it.
Yeah. So I wanted to make it interesting in that way. You know, one of my students did this film on compassion fatigue. And I, you know, so we can get that, you know, like, oh, okay, you know. So I wanted to lighten it up with these metaphors, this kind of mindful meditation. I wanted to meet the music. My composer, Esperanza, he did this, you know, he did this one score like that to me is so poetic and mindful meditation. That's because I didn't want to take away, but I wanted to be like almost normal and natural, like the sounds inside your body or inside your head or something like that. And Carlos Esperanza was very good. And my editor, Saman Meidani, my other producer, June No Ivers, we worked together, and I wanted them to meet some of the people, their families and everything, because you know, you just, and Khan Nguyen, you don't just put up a camera and shoot. I want you to know these people.
Yes, right.
You know, because you know, otherwise it wouldn't be humane. It'd be like, you know, putting it on tattoos and everything. In fact, one of the Marco told me, because the people from the south of Mexico don't hang out with the Black folks in prison. And Marco would come out around, he would hang out. He said, no, I won't be on camera. But he was able to talk to his folks, because they still have organizations. And he told them what Teach is doing because of this 40-year organization called the Black Prisoners Caucus, prisoner initiated. And they said, go ahead. So, you know, and so I wanted metaphors of land that was barren. And then all of a sudden you see trees, right? The possibility of growth. And he told me, he says, I don't know you. I like you, you seem trustworthy, but don't just put the camera on our tattoos. And so, you know, that taught me so much, not exotica or like, whoa, you know, but the possibilities. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt that, like, you know, my scholarship has been in somatics. I spent 10 years studying somatics. And as I was watching this, I was like, you attended to our bodies, you know, because watching that, going through it, you can see the liberation struggle. You can see that the inner, you know, that thing being cast out and relinquished. And it, you know, our brains don't necessarily make that distinction of like, oh, I'm witnessing that and that's something else. It's like, actually, if we let ourselves, we can witness that and also let it move the energy up and out of us. You know, that's what makes it art. And I felt like you attended to the body, you attended to the spirit, you attended to the analysis, and you attended to the narrative. And it really is such a holistic and glorious piece of work. And I'm so grateful that you made it. I run around talking to everyone. I'm like, have you seen Gilda Sheppard's film? And then they're like, what, where is it? I'm like, okay, there's no way you could have seen it yet, but you do need to see it. You know, like, I want everyone to see it. And, you know, we are doing this screening period for people to see it now. Is there anything that, as people are listening and watching, that they could do to help this film pick up even more energy, get to even more people?
Well, we're looking for distribution now, and if you at a college, thank you, University of California at Santa Cruz, for purchasing, you know, a link so that people can see it there. Thank you for this project. This is excellent. If you're at a university or college or a community organization, please let us know. You know, the website, I think we have it, www.sinceibeendown.com. Go there and let, you know, and we will talk to you about where we're going. We're going to be at Ebenezer Baptist Church has invited us, you know, and the national, we've been doing, and, you know, sometimes I get, I cut clips of certain of the folks in the film and give it to their family for whatever. And so some of the footage has added to people getting out of prison, because prisons are way over there. And we don't have, there are 16 states in the United States that don't have parole. And if we bring it back, it was let go because it was racist, and it will be, unless we have a community board. So we don't ever stop. Those who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, right? So you know, look at policy, vote, do all those things, understand.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, get to know your own local folks, you know, find folks that you can support. One of the things I'm doing, you've changed my trajectory in my life, because I saw your film and I was like, oh, I want to hear all those stories. I want to know those stories. And now I'm working on this anthology that, you know, it's slow burn, but I want to find stories of people who are doing this kind of organizing behind bars and bring those stories into the light, so that people understand that it's like, again, you're not trying to rescue. We're trying to destroy this whole system, dismantle this whole system, so that we can all be with these teachers together and learn these lessons together. So, and it's transformative justice, as you said. It's not transformative. What are we restoring them to? We need to transform them. Like, anyway. Well, and you know, I just had this beautiful talk with Fania Davis around the restorative, transformative thing, and it was so helpful for me, because, you know, it was like, I really feel that, you know, like on a language level, we're not restoring. We don't want to restore back to unjust conditions. We want to transform the conditions, and we want to transform them beyond the state, right? And there's something really aligned in that work, which is, it's not necessarily restoring to the unjust conditions, but how do we restore our humanity? How do we restore our dignity? How do we restore our sense of community, right? And fundamentally, that's at the root of all the work that we're doing, right? And that work can be done everywhere, must be done everywhere. So here we are. So Gina, I want to call you back in, because Gina's got the questions from folks who've been listening. And hi.
Hi. I really didn't want to stop listening to the two of you, so I'm going to try not to disrupt this. There are some questions, and people are really enthusiastic. And I just wanted to start by saying that this film does two very opposing things to me. On the one hand, I feel like I have no words, because after reading about prison stuff and watching the visual culture of incarceration for about 30 years, you have in this film, Gilda, really every answer that I've come to in all these years. And it's for a variety of reasons, but I think one of them is that it's who you're working with and the way you're working with them. And we know that when people have lived experience, that their own ability to generate the answers is profound, given certain conditions. And I think you've also helped to create those conditions. So I really want to thank you for that. It's amazing the degree to which we can read, now that there's a kind of cottage industry in critical prison studies, there's a kind of energy in generating more and more detail. But this film really takes us back to the essence of what the relationships are and tries to establish new ones. I love what you just said about the barren landscape and the green trees. I really was taken by those scenes where, you know, someone is interviewed with the trees behind, because it's something that breaks with the tradition of the filmic history of, you know, documentary on incarceration. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Yes. And I have to stop talking because the other part of me is going to be responsible and say that there are a lot of really important questions that I'm going to try not to editorialize too much. One of them, I think, gets to the heart of some of the complexity that we all encounter as abolitionists when we find these incredible people that we befriend and start to learn from inside. So this one comes from William, and he writes, how do we reconcile the idea of prison abolition with the remarkable journey that so many men, women take toward being a better self through prison educational and therapeutic programs? What would that look like? How would we construct extra prison programs that would provide the same type of journey?
You know what's so interesting is that the Black Prisoners Caucus is not unique. It's not an aberration. I think wherever there are oppressed people, those people who are the alleged victims of the suppressed become the subjects of their liberation. And I dare say that that is I think, and I have not done the research, that is in every prison. Go to the subject, you know, that how do you reconcile that is to find these revolutionary, caring, compassionate groups in almost every prison. People, this is not a slow fade in the gore. This is people redeeming themselves. And it takes so much hard work in prison. And then when they get out, the reentry, we realize that this is a prison too. So I think that wherever you look, you will see the subject not as only someone who has been preyed upon, but who understands, you know, it's like what Mr. Zimbabwe says, I dare say that the answer to many of society's problems, not just prison, can be found in prison. And so, I mean, there's no real magic formula, but find that. You will see it in your neighborhood, right? You will see it everywhere. Among houseless people, you can see as Mary says, you think the person under the bridge don't have the answer? Come on. Some people gonna give you some okie doke. I'm not saying, you know, because I know game too. You know what I mean? Me and Adrienne, we're from Detroit and you from New York, you know. So
well, we know. Exactly. I also think about, like, there's amazing programs. There's so many amazing programs where people are doing work that is cultural, that is catching folks and carrying them through cultural transition. I've seen brother-sister programs. I've seen programs like that. I'm also thinking of Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, which brings together political education, martial arts, and organizing to help gather the rigor, the embodiment rigor, the scholarship rigor, and the organizing rigor. I think about the Embodiment Institute that Prentice Hemphill is starting, which is really looking first at Black embodiment and figuring out how do we heal? Because so much of what's actually happening when I watch this is that there's a collective healing happening. And by being able to learn and be in a space together and say, I'm going to be seen and I'm going to see others in their dignity, something starts to heal that was broken by the way that the system snatches you up and isolates you. And so I'm like, start to pay attention to where is healing happening in your community as well. Where are you being invited back into the wholeness of your personhood? Because that's what they're telling us, is there's something about being able to be your true self and not be denied and not be ridiculed and not be isolated or disposed of. There's something there that is healing, and that, you know, I think we are the generations that are changing this, right? Like if we think about our long trajectory as even just as Black people in this country, we came here for total trauma and no agency. We're in this pivotal point. And I think we have to imagine a world in which we get to be our whole selves without that trauma even being our main memory or organizing principle, right? Is that we actually can heal beyond that generationally. So yeah, but the programs are there.
Yeah, but I think also William's question gets to a profound irony when you're doing this kind of work, which, you know,
Yes.
you hear Kamanti in the film and you see his own transition. So the challenge is both not to exceptionalize him. So I think the context in which you put him with others is so important, but also the challenge is not to allow the prison to get credit for the transformation.
Exactly.
And so I know you're speaking to that, but I think we really have to say this loudly, because sometimes the assumption is, oh, it's only with this form of isolation, this form of punishment, that people reach out and decide they want these things. But of course, as a teacher, you know, as teachers, I think we know that people crave deep knowledge, and they have often been denied it and frightened away from it. You know, when we're called as Black people, you know, overly intellectual when you're professors, or someone is referred to as too professorial. You know, I loved watching them teach in the classroom, because you realize that that is really what the best teaching always looks like. You know, so much facing each other, so much adjusting, thinking about syllabi, the way they talk about putting classes together. So I'm just saying all this to say, to let the film say, and let this event really say, none of what you've done suggests that the prison is responsible.
Thank you, Gina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Prison
feels so
doesn't
important
work.
to me. That feels so important to me, because I'm just like, what they're doing is subversive inside of these spaces. They're subversively saying we can actually learn something together that takes us beyond this space, you know? But I like that. That was so important to me too, because I was like, I can imagine people watching this, and if you're in that mindset, you can come to that conclusion. And it's like you're missing the point.
Yeah.
So
I'm
the point is
so
like
glad
there's so many spaces beyond this where we can learn these things.
Right. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Gina. I'm so glad. Thank you.
Well, and we have some, well, I want to say one thing, which comes from someone named Eugene. And he says, this is Eugene Youngblood, as you know, recently released from having served 29 years and a Black and a BPC member.
Right, I know him.
Yeah.
Hi, Eugene, he's there. Oh God.
So Eugene's question is, will there be a follow-up to this film?
I'm working on another film follow-up. Yeah, there'll be a follow-up of the same kind of themes, right? You know, I think Eugene, you're the follow-up for this film, right? Eugene is an amazing man. He's in some of the B-roll of the film, and his daughter was my student, and I taped him saying something, and I gave it to his daughter, and it was just amazing. It's some of the same things. I wanted to break down the, you know, racial capitalism, you know what I mean, in all its forms. And so I'm doing a short film on this about critical race theory, teaching truth, I call it. Then I want to do a film that that deals with the kind of Amazon culture that is happening. That's going to be a docudrama. But you know, Eugene, you are the follow-up. You and your colleagues are the follow-up to this film. I mean, you know, and the more that I can include you all in whatever I talk about, that will always happen. And so glad that you're here, Eugene, Mr. Youngblood. Oh, wow.
It's really exciting. It's exciting to see how these communities bring people together. You know, this world that we're fortunate enough to live in that connects all of these people that are often unseen. So it's really exciting. I have a few more things I want to try and get in here because there's so many questions coming in. I'm going to put two for you because they're not exactly linked, but I think you might be able to link them. One is from Janine saying, could you both reflect on how learning is a specifically important aspect of abolition? And I think Janine was interesting in saying learning as opposed to the other terms we might use. And the other person is, the question is from Julia. I have worked as a mental health clinician in jails. Could you speak to the challenges of the overcoming trauma of incarceration? And I twinned those, not because they came in together, but I thought you might be able to work with them.
Adrienne, you want to go first?
Yeah.
I mean, I can.
I got my nerve.
I'm like, well, I mean, I feel like I'm thinking of Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, you know, talking about that abolition is not about the absence, but about the presence of life-affirming institutions. And to me, learning is one of the most life-affirming activities that we can ever engage in. It says that I'm not finished, that I can continue shaping and changing and growing and becoming. And I think it's one of the things we get denied, and I think is getting, it's sort of, there's this thing about like, oh, you know, there's an anti-intellectualism, you know, that is like a wildfire throughout our nation. And throughout, I think anywhere that fascism is showing its head, that anti-intellectualism is always right there with it, right? That if you can keep people ignorant and away from learning, then you can make them very quickly become a part of systems that are not life affirming, that are making use of them and using them in whatever ways you want to. So to me, that if we're trying to abolish these major systems, then fundamentally at the heart of it, there's falling in love with learning. And I think one of the pieces of work for us as educators and writers and others is how do I make people fall? I try to write such that people fall in love with learning. You know, I'm like, there's abolition books out there, but I want to make one that's really pretty for you and talks about mushrooms. You know, I want to make it really appealing for you to go on this journey and then point you in the direction of, I'm like, you can get even more of this in these directions. And I feel like Kamanti, you know, when I was watching the film and we got to speak to Kamanti, I was like, Kamanti feels like a kindred spirit to me. Like, I feel like if we had switched places, I feel like I would be doing what Kamanti's doing. Is I want to learn everything I can to be as free as I can. And there's one clip we didn't show, I think that's my bad, but of Del Mar, who says that I have to be careful coming into these spaces because I start to feel free. When I'm in these rooms and I start to feel free. And it makes me emotional to think about that. I'm like, learning unlocks the gates. It unlocks the bars, you know? So that's something that I would offer into.
Oh, yeah. Well, you said it perfectly. And to add, to think about trauma, right? That yes. I think that we all have some sort of trauma, but when you come out of prison, that trauma becomes exacerbated when I mean, one of my students said he got off the bus at the wrong place and it was this wide field and he just like didn't know. He's used to, or when his lover says something, keeps asking him questions, he thinks of the guards, right? So we carry this, I think Michelle Alexander said, this invisible cage of incarceration, right? And we carry this, you know, and we carry it in our bodies, but we carry it in our new experiences. And I think that needs to be like social emotional learning, needs to go K-12, you know, and teachers need to learn how to integrate. It's not the extra class. It should be integrated in science and math and literature and humanities and everything, you know, because we are embattled. And unless it's like, here I go with Bell Hooks again. She says, I was suffering inside until I could name it. And that's what theory brought to her, right? So it's more than theory, it's also practice. And so we have to realize, and that's the reason why the Black Princess Caucus Teach program has healthy thinking in there. That's right? And that's the reason why they co-teach together. You know, because they want to pay attention to it, call it out, but also have it be an invisible thread that runs through so that you have group work to help one another, peer teaching and those kinds of things, including a person's life in their scholarship and what we're learning. Say, you know, do some research over here in your neighborhood so that you can discover and create, right? You know, I tell my students, my thing is, soon as you think you got it, it moves.
Move on.
You know what I mean? It's like, whoa.
Well, and I do also feel like, you know, it's all dialectical, but like trauma is also that way where like, you know, you will be healing your trauma for the rest of your life. We all, whatever our traumas are, we will keep healing them. But each time we come around to them, we are different. We have more tools. And one of the things I'm like, my other evangelism is for this somatics work, because I'm like, trauma gets stuck in the body until it is invited to complete itself, to complete its process. So much of what's happening to people in those incarcerated spaces is someone saying, you can't feel when you need to feel. You can't move your body when you need to move your body. You can't heal. You're under this constant traumatic experience. So part of it is also figuring out, you know, I'm like, I really want to figure out how do we do somatics programs within these spaces so that we can say like, here are tools you can begin to use for your healing process now. Here's the centering work. And I'm sure this is also, I'm like throwing it out there. I'm like, if it's happening, let me know. Yeah. But you know, Aikido can do this, yoga can do this, other things can do this, but like how to let people have access to their bodies again and complete those processes of trauma so that then as you come back around to it, it's like, oh, that is in my past. That is a wound that is healing, you know? I'm really, and again, I keep thinking about this, not just at an individual level, but really what we're talking about is this is a collective trauma and it's impacting those who are in and those who are outside, loving and missing and holding and in the complex relationships that we hold. It's like the healing needs to be massive. And I'm really curious about how we're going to do something at the scale that's needed.
Well, speaking of the scale, I have the one question that often comes up. I've been thinking about this question because this is a question that I've been asked since I started this work. It comes from Roxy, and the question is, should there be transformative justice for those who've committed non-consensual sex or sexual predatory behavior? Should they be canceled? Why or why not?
See, I want it to stop, and canceling it to me doesn't stop it. Right. It depends on what you mean by cancel, right? I think there needs to be a lot of re-education about patriarchy and you know, even when women practice patriarchy, right? And you know, I hate it. I thought to myself, if someone raped and brutally killed my niece who I love more than life, or one of my grandkids who I love more than life, I want to scratch their eyes out. But more importantly, I would not want it to happen to anybody else. So what do we do to stop it? Do we stop it by saying, I'm going to cancel you and put you away? That doesn't stop it, right? There are examples in Europe where some of those folks live together and accountable to one another. There are examples. I can't stand it. I hate it. I want to, but I want to stop it. I don't want to just pluck a weed and throw it away. I want to find out why, how was I complicit in how I voted and how I moved through the world, or I talk to people, you know, so that we can stop it. I don't think plucking a weed and throwing it in the garbage is the way to stop it. And that's what I think that we need to do. There's no easy answers, but there are examples. There are examples for this kind of treatment of this. I say it's a public health issue. I say it's a mental health issue, right? And, you know, it's misogyny and it's hatred of yourself too, I think too. So, you know, so what do we do? You know, as a prison abolitionist, you know, I want to envision looking at, as Bill says, you know, at what is concrete reality, and based on that concrete reality, what are the possibilities that include it? So I can't be like, not you, but you, not you, but you.
Right.
And it's hard for
I
me
wanna,
to say this.
yeah.
Please.
Well, no, I just want to hold this up because this is my answer whenever people ask this question. This book is called Fumbling Towards Repair, and it is a workbook, literally a workbook. You can move through it and create processes for community accountability facilitators. And the answer to the question is, that is what it was for, right? Transformative justice, as we have it defined in large part, was created by people who are like, we are experiencing immense sexual harm in our communities, and we recognize that we don't want our people to end up in these prison systems. We need some non-state alternative for handling this. Transformative justice wasn't created for conflict, right? It wasn't created because we're upset with each other. It was created for egregious harm. And how do we actually turn and handle that as a community? And the thing I want to share, Miriam Kaba, who co-authored this and who also wrote a book called We Do This Till We Free Us. And basically anything that Miriam does and says and writes and podcasts, you should be listening to. But one of the things she teaches us is that we have been in this experiment of disposability and punitive culture for 250 years in this country in the form of this incarceration experiment, and it hasn't worked. So, you know, it's like if we said, oh, I would feel so differently if as a survivor, I would feel so differently if you said people go into prison and, you know, 5 years later, 10 years later, they come out and they never do that harm again. They're restored and they come, and it's amazing. I'm like, but that never happened. That has not happened. What happens instead is people go in and the traumas that led to the harmful behavior in the first place get crystallized into them. It becomes the structure within the structure. And actually then the level of violence increases, because what you have to learn to survive so often is, okay, I have to detach further from my humanity rather than turn towards it and heal. So the thing I think transformative justice really is saying, you know, how do we go to the root of this harm and bring it to the surface? What does accountability actually look like? How do we know when we've experienced it? And how do we become satisfiable around accountability? And I think those are big things. I think we're at the beginning of this, which is why it feels like, what? You know, I'm like, yes, we're at the beginning of it. I also want to say something that Miriam says often, which is, we're not going to go straight from a carceral system to a transformative justice system that's just like one-to-one. Transformative justice will only work because all of us decide to take on more responsibility for what happens in our communities. And instead of the toss away method where we're like, we'll send them behind there and not look anymore. So that's, you know, the answer is a little bit like, how much can you tolerate of those processes? Maybe you can't tolerate them for yourself, but for people who are 1 or 2 or 3 steps removed from you, are you willing to look at these kind of tools and learn them? You know, I'm supporting multiple people through situations right now. And the thing I know about this is there's not a right way, right? For each person, there's a particular path that they need. And we have to be willing to hear all those paths. Like R. Kelly needed a particular path, right? Like when you have that much resource and power behind what you're doing, you need a particular intervention to stop, right? I still wish there was something other than prison. You know, if we could say we'll mute and then there's something else besides that we can go towards, but we don't have that right now. What are the interventions? How do we create other options for people? So yeah, I feel passionately about that.
Yeah,
I do too. I feel passionately about abolition feminism for sure. And
Yes.
I would love to continue.
Do you have a resource about to come out about that, Gina?
I'm cooking something up with some collaborators. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll find out about it later when she's ready.
To be continued. So I want to thank you both so much. There were a number of different things that came in that were asking for suggestions. Some people like to look at the bookshelves and wanted book suggestions. Other people wanted to know what could be done for Comanche. And I think it's the particular case, but Gilda, as you pointed out, it's also the lack of parole and the systemic character of that. And Kamanti's one example, but not the only. And so we can certainly try and send out to folks or to put on our website any of the suggestions or things that can be done. So please feel free to share those with us. But for now, we try to respect people's time on Zoom and not go over. And I just want to thank you for this beautiful conversation. And I feel like we could have stayed together all night enjoying what is going to look like when we actually have abolition.
Oh, Gina, that's beautiful. Thank you all so very much for supporting this film and all the issues that come out of, surrounding this film from the bottom of my heart.
Bottom of our hearts.
I bow down to you, Gilda. Thank you so much for this film. Honestly, thank you.
Oh.
It will change many, many lives. It already has.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Good night.
Good night.